The air inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse carried a heaviness that seemed to press down on everyone present. It was the kind of thick, suffocating atmosphere that wrapped itself around skin and nerves, fueled not by heat but by expectation. The gallery was full, rows of spectators murmuring among themselves, eyes darting toward the defendant's table, as though the young man standing there were a puzzle they hadn't quite solved. The defendant's table itself seemed too big for him, a stretch of polished wood that dwarfed his lean frame. He stood beside it, hands buried casually in the pockets of his jeans, chin tilted upward just enough to show he wasn't afraid. Jalen Dawson, 19 years old, accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The charges were weighty, the kind of accusations that followed a person for life if not handled properly. But the way Judge Walter Grayson peered down at him from the elevated bench made it clear this trial wasn't simply about the law. To Grayson, the trial had already been decided long before Jalen had walked into the room. Grayson leaned back in his massive chair, his fingers drumming lazily against the polished surface of his desk. His expression was one of tired superiority, lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. Over the rim of his glasses, he studied the young man as though weighing not evidence but worth. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" His voice carried a dry amusement, a tone designed to slice through dignity. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A ripple of chuckles ran through the courtroom. The bailiff smirked. The stenographer suppressed a grin. Even the prosecutor let out a soft laugh. They were all in on the joke, everyone except Jalen. He didn't flinch, didn't smile. His stillness was unnerving, the silence of someone who had measured the room and chosen not to play by its rules. What they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that Jalen had been preparing for this moment in ways that had nothing to do with crime. He had grown up in the shadow of case law, his childhood nights filled with the stories his mother, Denise Dawson, a paralegal for over 2 decades, brought home. He learned early how prosecutors cut corners, how judges played favorites, how defense attorneys sometimes failed their clients before the trial even began. While other kids memorized basketball stats, Jalen memorized case precedents. While his friends played video games, he argued imaginary cases in his head, building defense after defense until the rhythm of courtroom strategy became second nature. By 14, he could break down a trial better than most first-year law students. But none of that mattered to Judge Grayson, who saw only another troubled kid. "Let's make this quick." The judge sighed, flipping open the case file. "I've got a golf game at 2. The gallery chuckled again, the sound bouncing against the walls. But this time, Jalen allowed himself the faintest curl of a smirk. The judge had just made his first mistake, though no one else in the room had noticed it yet. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, rose from his seat with the calm assurance of a man who believed he had already won. His navy suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, his stride rehearsed. He had delivered this speech 100 times before, and he had no doubt this one would end the same way. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was caught red, handed in a stolen vehicle. A 2022 Audi A6 reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers pursued him through downtown Los Angeles, where he allegedly attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The evidence, he said with practiced confidence, speaks for itself. The words landed heavily. The gallery shifted uncomfortably. It sounded damning. A stolen car, a chase, a defendant caught in the act. Judge Grayson nodded slowly, glancing over at Jalen with a look that was equal parts boredom and disdain. Go on. Carrington paced toward the jury, his shoes tapping out a rhythm of confidence on the floor. He turned, fixing Jalen with a cold stare. The defense may try to convince you this was all a misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson is just some unfortunate victim of circumstance. But let's be honest. What kind of victim runs from the police? The tension in the room tightened like a wire pulled taut. Grayson leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand, waiting for the performance to finish. The prosecutor flipped through his stack of neatly ordered papers. Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before he attempted to flee. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made by the book. Sounds straightforward to me, Grayson said with a dismissive nod. The gallery murmured in agreement. A clear, cut case, but Jalen saw the cracks. He had spent years studying trials, learning to look beneath the surface, to hear not just what was said, but what wasn't. Still, he remained silent, waiting, watching. Finally, Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. All right. Let's hear the defense's response. His eyes flicked toward Lisa Thornton, the public defender assigned to Jalen. She stood, shifting nervously. Your Honor, my client. But Jalen's hand touched her arm, a silent signal. She hesitated, then sat back down, her relief almost palpable. And then, for the first time, Jalen spoke. I'll be representing myself, Your Honor. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. The room froze. Grayson blinked, clearly amused. You'll what? I'll be defending myself, Jalen repeated, his voice calm, steady, unnervingly sure. A murmur spread through the gallery. The bailiff's eyebrows rose. Even Carrington's smirk faltered for just a moment before curving back into a laugh. This should be interesting, he muttered, but the laughter died quickly as Jalen stepped forward. The weight of the room seemed to shift with him. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uneasy before speaking again. Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution. Carrington crossed his arms, sighing impatiently. Go ahead. You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct? That's right, Carrington replied, and that testimony is written in his report. Of course it is. Jalen turned to Judge Grayson, pulling his hands from his pockets for the first time. Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence. Grayson squinted down at him. On what grounds? Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began. A flicker of confusion crossed Carrington's face. What are you talking about? I'd like to submit a request to verify Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, then his location history should match. But Jalen let the word hang, sharp and deliberate. I have a feeling it won't. The gallery buzzed, whispers rippling through the air. Judge Grayson frowned, glancing at Carrington. Counselor, Carrington's jaw tightened. Your Honor, that report was filed by an officer of the law. Are we really going to take the word of a defendant over a trained professional? Jalen shrugged casually. If the officer was where he claimed to be, the GPS will prove it. If not, he trailed off, letting the implication hang heavy. The silence stretched. The jury noticed the hesitation. The gallery noticed. Most importantly, Judge Grayson noticed. Counselor Grayson pressed. Carrington hesitated just long enough to betray unease. No objections, Your Honor, but the damage was done. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The prosecutor scrambled, his polished confidence cracking. Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. Jalen nodded. That's true. But let's talk about that evidence for a second. Grayson raised an eyebrow, curious despite himself. Jalen turned to the jury, locking eyes with each one. The prosecution wants you to believe that finding my fingerprints in a car means I stole it. That's the story they're selling, but let's think logically. Imagine you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back. Hours later, someone steals that jacket. Would your fingerprints make you the thief? A few jurors exchanged uneasy glances. The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. I was inside with 3 friends. Yes, I leaned against the car. Yes, I opened the door. It was unlocked. Dumb curiosity, but I didn't steal it. I didn't drive it. I didn't take a thing. He paused, then asked softly, "Does touching something make you a criminal?" The gallery murmured. Someone gasped. Carrington cleared his throat, rifling through notes like a drowning man searching for a rope. And while we're on the topic, Jalen continued smoothly, was the forensic specialist who processed that fingerprint evidence subpoenaed to testify. Grayson blinked, caught off guard. He glanced at Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated, then muttered, "No. So let me get this straight." Jalen said, his tone cutting, "The state is using forensic evidence to try and convict me, but didn't think it necessary to bring in the actual specialist. No chance to question chain of custody. No chance to challenge accuracy." Carrington's jaw clenched. "Interesting," Jalen said softly. Grayson exhaled heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. This was no longer the easy case he'd assumed, but Jalen wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his voice firm. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the vehicle's owner." Grayson frowned. The owner. "Yes, Mr. Raymond Whittaker. He gave a statement the night his car was stolen. The prosecution didn't submit it." Carrington stiffened. He knew what was coming. Jalen pulled a printed transcript from his file. His voice rang clear as he read. "I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid. He was white." The gallery erupted, gasps and murmurs crashing like a wave. "That's from the original police report," Jalen said, holding the paper aloft. "The same report the prosecution never mentioned. I don't even match the description. The only thing tying me to this case is bad police work and assumptions." Carrington stammered, "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. No." Jalen cut in sharply. "What's irrelevant is the state's case. I was blocks away, walking home from the store when I was arrested. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't fleeing. I was a black kid in the area, and that was close enough for them." The words dropped like a hammer. Silence. Grayson rubbed his temple, eyes shifting to the jury. The case had collapsed in front of him. dismantled by a 19-year-old who wasn't supposed to stand a chance. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Does the prosecution have anything further?" Carrington's face was flushed. "No, Your Honor." Grayson leaned forward. His gavel hovered in the air, then it fell. Case dismissed. The room exploded, shouts, gasps, chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors whispered in shock. The gallery erupted into disbelief. Jalen stood still, letting the moment settle around him. Grayson watched him, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes was something new, recognition, maybe even regret. Jalen turned and walked toward the doors. "Mr. Dawson," Grayson's voice called out. Jalen stopped. The judge hesitated, then said, "You should consider law school." Jalen smirked faintly. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. Outside, the courthouse steps swarmed with reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "Jalen, did you know the case would be dismissed? What's next for you? How does it feel to outmaneuver a prosecutor?" He pulled his hoodie up, ignoring them. This wasn't about spectacle. At the bottom of the steps, his mother waited. Denise Dawson, arms crossed, face unreadable. For a moment, she simply stared. Then she let out a shaky breath. "Boy, you scared me half to death." Jalen chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She studied him for a moment longer, then pulled him into a fierce hug. "You always were the stubborn one." Across the street, Judge Grayson stood by his car, watching. His posture was different now, stripped of arrogance. His gaze carried reflection. This case had been routine in his mind, just another day, another guilty plea. But he would remember this one, because Jalen had forced the system to look at itself. And for once, it had blinked. And the lesson was clear. How many other cases had gone the same way? How many others had been convicted not by evidence but by bias, shortcuts, and a system more concerned with closing cases than finding truth? Jalen had the knowledge to fight back, but what about those who didn't? This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in, but next time he wouldn't be the defendant. He'd be the attorney, and when that day came, he wouldn't stand alone. The cameras flashed, the crowd surged, but Jalen's eyes were already on the future, because the system was flawed. But change begins when someone stands up and fights back, and Jalen Dawson was ready to fight.